Okay, I want to talk about the subject of national service. The pretext of this, or the context of this, is that Prince Harry has apparently come out and said he thinks it would be a good idea. You may know that Prince Harry served in the British Armed Forces for a brief period in Afghanistan. Um, Harry obviously enjoys his soldiering work. You can tell he's got a real passion from it. He enjoys working with his men and so on. So anyway, he's a high-profile backer of national service. The exact situation on this is somewhat different in different countries. In Britain, we abolished it. I'm not sure about the exact year, but I believe it was sometime in the late 1960s. So we had it for a considerable period in the post-war years, but then it was scrapped sometime in the late 60s. I'm not sure why exactly, but I know that was a period of progressive politics, so I don't know whether it tied in with that or not. By which I mean it was a period of big reforms, for example, abolition of the death penalty, decriminalisation of homosexuality. This was all under the Harold Wilson years, and it was around that time that national service was abolished. Now, since it's been abolished, there has been competing views on both sides about whether it should be reintroduced or not. This is one of those subjects I can honestly see both sides, otherwise sway more towards one opinion than the other. The opinion I sway towards is that we should keep it abolished. That's where my sympathies lie more. But I do understand both sides. So what I'm going to do is just sort of reflect on the arguments that both sides sort of broadly have, and then why I believe that it should be one over the other. Firstly, those who I'll start with those who oppose it. The general argument is it takes away liberty. If you have national service for, say, 2 years, that would be the sort of general time frame, I think, maybe even 1 year. It's nevertheless a consuming period of time. Um, Now, it could be argued that if you're doing work, that's consuming period of time anyway, but at least you have some level of choice in that. With national service, it's basically forced to do something. You can't really gloss it over anyway. You're basically forced to do something. Um, it's not quite a case that, it would be forcing people to go out and kill. I think that's a simplification. And I don't think it's necessarily even just the armed forces. I think it could also broaden to include a wide range of things, like maybe working in a hospital or working in some other context. But anyway, opponents would say it takes away personal liberty because, for example, if someone has pacifist convictions, say what you want about their opinion, but forcing them to do something they believe is wrong is just it's wrong. Um, and people say it's just fundamentally undemocratic in the sense that you've got no choice over the matter. It comes down to forced servitude. So this is the argument that would go in the way of being against national service. Another argument against it is that one of the reasons we have a very professional armed forces is because they are professionals. These are people who want to do the work and they're trained to do it, and they train very hard to do it. The difference between that and conscripts is in many cases conscripts wouldn't want to be there. And if we look at, for example, the First World War, that was definitely the case with a lot of conscripts. They were basically obliged to join up. And I mean, Harry Patch, for example, the old veteran who died a few years ago, he was a conscript in the First World War, and he never liked it. He wasn't a volunteer; he was a conscript, and he always gave the impression that he never liked that. Now, obviously, part of the reason is the horror of the trenches that he would have seen things most of us can't imagine. But I think even the general consensus of having to go, he didn't agree with that, and I imagine a lot of people would agree with him. And I know a lot of serving soldiers don't like that idea. Just had a bit of a debate actually with a guy who calls himself a veteran, and he opened by saying, "Oh, all these civvies complaining about national service." Well, The thing is, there's a lot of soldiers that don't actually want conscripts serving beside them precisely because they wouldn't be professional in the same way. So you'd have a situation where some people have a lot more experience than others. So how would you get that sort of equilibrium of skill? And then you'd have a situation where there is tensions. So professional soldiers would think that they're sort of being held back because maybe they're having to train people who just don't have the heart in it. And then the people who don't want to be there would maybe get the impression that they're being pushed around or bullied by professional soldiers. So you can imagine the situation where tensions would arise. Um, and incidentally, I don't think bullying is a trivial matter. I think it's a serious problem. So anyone that thinks that's a trivial issue, go and fuck yourself because it's not. Um, Sorry to be blunt about that, but that's how I feel about it. So that would be some of the arguments against it. Arguments for it. In the interest of being objective, I want to weigh these out as well. There are people who say that having national service gives a sense of civic pride and responsibility, um, and a sort of sense of loyalty to one's country. But I think the only way you could really judge this is by seeing how that sort of compares in countries that do have national service, such as I believe Germany does, Israel certainly does. Um, and then the follow-up question would be, well, do those societies have, I don't know, lower crime levels? Do they have lower, do they have a greater sense of patriotism? And I think that's debatable. I mean, Germany has youth crime. The idea that it doesn't, because it has national services, is naive, I think. Um, and certainly a lot of Israelis resent the concept of their national service. I know, for example, there's been protests by Orthodox Jewish communities about having to serve in the Israeli Defense Forces. Those are just two examples. There's other countries that use it, and I wouldn't want to go into detail about how this stacks up. But to be fair, some of the principles of it are good. I do think that there are some people who constantly whinge about their country and they don't have any sort of civic pride whatsoever. Um, so in that sense, but then again, just forcing them into something, it's how they're going to compel them to the idea. It's probably going to make them resent it even more. So my conclusion to this, where my view lies, is that the premise is a good one, that of civic responsibility, but forcing people to do something, well, then again, there's also, I'm just sort of backtracking a little bit here because I do want to be objective on this. Um, it wouldn't necessarily be a case of forcing people to join the armed forces. And if it is universal, as opposed to just targeting, I mean, I know there's people out there who propose it for the unemployed and so on. I'm dead set against that because it is criminalizing unemployed people, and that is just a byproduct of Tory thinking and a byproduct of a society that turns in against itself, sort of scapegoating and punishing those who are struggling. And I just don't have any time for that sort of mentality. Um, I can see an argument for having some sort of national service for offenders and people who are committing crime because I do think they should pay back. I've always held somewhat conservative views on that. But that's different than people who haven't committed a crime. Um, I suspect that national service could actually play a role in place of what we now have for community service, i.e., for less serious crimes, in which case people are not incarcerated, but they are being made to pay back to society. So I would be broadly in favour of some sort of national service for young offenders. Um, I know a few years ago in France, Ségolène Royal proposed this. France, like Britain, doesn't, as far as I know, have a national service. Um, but it's striking that some of the most professional armies in the world, or some of the most highly rated armies in terms of the sort of prestige that they have, notably France, the United States, and the United Kingdom, none of those countries have a national service. So I wonder, is there a correlation there? Whereas countries that do, interestingly enough, tend to be countries that stay away from military intervention. And I wouldn't want to insult any country by saying that one country is less professional than another, whatever, because I'm not a military expert. But um, it is interesting that countries that have um, a volunteer arms service, i.e., people who join up because they want to, tend to actually be involved in more intervention than countries that don't. That's an interesting thing. Um, National service, though, like I say, isn't just about armed forces. It's also about, I guess you could look at areas like hospitals or volunteering in charity or something. But to me, the whole idea about volunteering is that people want to do it. Is that people are doing it because they want to contribute to society, they want to help people, not because they're forced to, because the government tells them to. So to me, it negates the whole principle of volunteering. Um, I understand why people want to bring it back because probably the level of antisocial behaviour might arguably be higher than it was at a time when we had national service. But it's a bit of a myth that we had no antisocial behaviour at that time. And also, I would argue that the rates now are marginally less than they were 10 years ago. But anyway, the premise, whilst understandable, I ultimately sway to the view that it is takes away from personal liberty. Um, and there's differing opinions on this within the armed forces. There may be some soldiers who want it back, but there's other soldiers who don't. So opinions within the armed forces themselves is diverse. Um, my instinct, as someone who really does believe in liberty, is that it could be used to some extent for certain areas. For example, for those uh, people who really have hurt society, offenders, for example, I believe it could have a purpose for those sort of people because they do need to pay back society. But using it, for example, for someone who's maybe graduated from university or they're 19 generally, and you're saying, now for 2 years of your life, we're going to force you to do this. It's very time consuming and it takes out a big chunk of that person's life when they could be doing something else. They could be volunteering with a charity, they could be traveling, they could be um, training in something they actually have a passion for. There's a whole range of reasons why you could argue that it is taking away liberty. Um, and with all due respect to that serviceman who talked about cities whinging about it, the difference is he made a choice. He wanted to join the army. No one forced him to. And that is a fundamental difference. If you are serving a soldier, you've got my respect, but you chose to do it. That's the difference with national service. There is no choice.